arrest of an African-American Harvard professor this past weekend has seemingly created a racial firestorm across the country with people on both sides of the debate. Speaking, our Prime News correspondent Rochelle Carey joins us now with a closer look at that debate in our weekly feature, What Matters. Go ahead, Rochelle.
All right, Mike. Henry Louis Gates' arrest has reignited the discussion about race relations in the United States. He was arrested for disorderly conduct when officers responded to a possible break-in at his home last week. Turns out the front door was stuck, and he and his driver were just trying to get in. Charges against him were dropped earlier this week. The arresting officer, Sergeant James Crowley, says race did not play a factor. Well, the debate heated up when President Obama said the Cambridge Police Department acted stupidly. Today, he talked on the phone to both Professor Gates and Sergeant Crowley, then publicly clarified his remark.
I unfortunately then gave an impression that I was maligning the Cambridge Police Department or Sergeant Crowley specifically. And I could have calibrated those words differently. And I told this to Sergeant Crowley. I continue to believe, based on what I have heard, that there was an overreaction in pulling Professor Gates out of his home to the station. I also continue to believe, based on what I heard, that Professor Gates probably overreacted as well.
Okay, joining me to talk about this, Boyce Watkins, professor at Syracuse University and founder of YourBlackWorld.com. Dr. James Peterson, assistant professor of English at Bucknell University and self-proclaimed hip-hop scholar. And Steve Cardian, a former police detective. All right, first, Boyce, I want to go to you. What is your reaction to the president speaking out again today? I think some people in the press corps were caught off guard when he walked into the briefing room.
Yeah, I think the president made the right move. I think that any logical person knows that you don't start a very damning statement by saying that Skip Gates is my friend, I'm probably biased, and I don't have all the facts, but they behave stupidly. I mean, not only was that literally like a verbal war strike on this department, which probably led to some heads rolling, it was also undermined by his admission that he didn't know the facts. But President Obama's a smart guy, and he knows when he makes mistakes, and unlike someone, say, like Rush Limbaugh, he admits when he screws up, and I think that he handled this very well. And I think that what has to happen now is we've got to open up the broader dialogue. Right now, this situation is between Crowley and Gates, Crowley-Gates. And you know what? This may not even be about race. This may be about egos. This may be more of a class issue than it is a race issue. But there is a broader race issue that we have to deal with across the nation.
Okay, I'll get to that in just a second. Actually, James, I want your reaction as well to what President Obama said today.
Well, I'm glad that he backed off his comments a bit, but I agree with his original assessment, especially considering the fact that the officer in question, Officer Crowley, claims to be a diversity trainer, and he's a well-decorated and well-respected officer. That means that his cooler head should have prevailed in this matter, and it's pretty clear now that the facts are out, that he did not have to arrest Professor Gates. And the thing is, we cannot divorce this from the history. That's the problem. I know people want to move on, and now people want to be cool and calm and collected about it, but it's very, very difficult for me personally to divorce this issue from the long and sad history of the poor relationships between police departments and the African-American communities that they have to police.
Well, actually, right now, this has kind of been a he said, even though there is a police report. None of us were there. Actually, I want to hear right now from Sergeant Crowley and from Professor Gates both. Let's do that right now.
I was continuously telling him to calm down during this whole exchange because I really didn't want this either. And I didn't, although I didn't know at the time who Professor Gates was, knowing he was an affiliate of Harvard, I really didn't want to have to take such a drastic action because I knew that it was going to bring a certain amount of attention, unwanted attention on me. Nonetheless, that's how far Professor Gates pushed it and provoked and just wouldn't stop.
It was the fault of a policeman who couldn't stand a black man standing up for his rights right in his face. And that's what I did. And I would do the same thing exactly again.
Steve, I want to ask you, at what point, there was obvious tension between them at Professor Gates' home. At what point, as long as you're not putting your hands on an officer, does an officer have a right to arrest you in your own home? Explain that to us.
Well, Rochelle, After he did produce his identification after much protest, the sergeant was berated and he was yelled at and he was called a racist. And, you know, the statute reads public inconvenience, annoyance, and alarm. And looking at it objectively, we have to wonder, did Mr. Gates prejudge this officer as a racist before he even interacted with him?
I understand that, but my question is, regardless of the verbal interaction between them, I'm just asking you as a police officer, at what point was it okay to arrest him? That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, once he became...
And I realize you weren't there, Steve. I do understand that.
Right. Once there was difficulty in dealing with Mr. Gates, and Sergeant Crowley warned him that his behavior was out of order, there comes a point where he makes the decision to effect the arrest to stop this person from creating a disturbance, having people gather, and creating annoyance and alarm for those in the surrounding area.
All right, it's obviously a difficult situation to judge if we're not there. We're not done talking about this as well. We've got some people lined up who want to talk about it. We're going to share some Facebook comments, some emails. So Boyce, James, Steve, don't go anywhere. People have been fired up about this topic. More to come on the other side of the break here on Prime News.
He was very grateful to his neighbor, but I can't believe that we're going to try to have this conversation as if black people are not racially profiled on a regular basis. His response is contingent on that history and the kind of behavior that we've seen in the past from certain police departments. And not to excuse his behavior, but let's keep it in context. I mean, Officer Crowley, if as Professor Watkins is saying, Officer Crowley made a discretionary decision, I think he made the wrong decision in this particular case. If he's supposed to be such a well-received and well-respected officer, I would want officers of the law to make better decisions. And yes, this is a national conversation. I wish we had this much attention when Oscar Grant was murdered, but the bottom line is that we're faced with these challenges on a regular basis. We need Professor Gates to scream loud right now so that we can leverage his position to address this issue across the nation.
Well,
and Rochelle,
go ahead quickly.
Rochelle, if I may, I mean, it's my belief that Mr. Gates should have treated the officer as he did his neighbor, shook his hand and thanked him for coming to his aid and making sure that he was okay in his home.
All right, Boyce,
can't
James,
say
and
that.
Steve. Boyce, James, and Steve,
him.
we're out of time. We're out of time, and the president did sort of tamp down his comments, but he did not tamp down his comments to say that we needed to talk about race and we needed to talk about racial profiling. He did not back off of that. For more of What Matters, check out the August issue of Essence Magazine or log on to cnn.com/What Matters. Mike?
All right, Michelle, sounded like your panel was just getting warm there.
Yeah, they were.
Clock's ticking on us. More news coming up. Stay with us.